3 months. That's how long my father was dead before anyone thought to tell me. I had $211, a sleeping daughter in the back seat, and a cracked phone screen pressed to my ear, a lawyer's voice on the other end, calling my father's land worthless. Said there was no need to bother me sooner. I found it myself. A rusted container home on steel legs above a creek, a wooden bridge half rotted through. The water sounded cold before I even touched it. The boards gave soft under my boots, and underneath the rust, underneath the mud, something smelled like fresh paint. Someone had been here. Recently. My family said this land meant nothing. They had no idea what my father hid inside it. Angela Cole had learned how to wake up without rocking the van. It was a small skill, the kind nobody teaches you, the kind you build one morning at a time until it just belongs to your body. She eased her weight off the driver's seat. One hand braced against the door so the springs wouldn't creak. Maya was still asleep in the back, curled around Patch, the stuffed fox with 3 visible seams where Angela had stitched him back together over the years. Fog sat low over the church parking lot behind them and past the tree line. The French Broad ran gray and quiet in the early light. Late March, cold. The kind that got into your knees before it got into your breath. She wiped the inside of the windshield with her sleeve, checked the gas gauge out of habit. A quarter tank, same as last night, and started the small routine that made a parking lot feel, for 20 minutes each morning, almost like a home. Water heated on the little camp stove wedged between the seats. A washcloth for her face, then Maya's, careful not to wake her yet. Everything had a place. Everything had a job. That was the only way any of it worked. 14 months earlier, her husband Daniel had died of lung cancer, the kind the VA takes its time believing in. He'd spent 2 years waiting on a disability claim tied to burn pit exposure overseas, denied twice, approved 4 months after his funeral, once the paperwork finally caught up to what his body had already known. Angela didn't talk about it much. There wasn't a way to talk about it that didn't sound like complaining, and she had never been a woman who complained. She'd been a combat medic once, Army, 2 tours in Iraq. The kind of work where you learned to read a person's condition before they told you what was wrong. After she got out, she'd gone back to school on the GI Bill, become a licensed practical nurse, spent 9 years at a small family clinic here in Marshall. The kind of job where people remembered your name and brought you tomatoes from their garden in August. The clinic closed 5 months ago. Insurance reimbursements had gotten too thin to keep the lights on, the owner said, like it was a fact of weather instead of a decision somebody made. $211 in checking. $61,400 still owed to a hospital that had tried, genuinely tried, to save Daniel before anyone believed what had made him sick. The phone rang at 7:40, a number she didn't recognize. A man's voice, careful and pleasant in the way people are pleasant when they're delivering news they've delivered 100 times before. He said he was calling from Whitfield and Cross, on behalf of the estate of Harold Cole. Angela sat very still. Her father had died 3 months ago. Congestive symptoms, complications from Parkinson's. Quick at the end, the lawyer said, like that was supposed to be a comfort. Mrs. Doyle, Renee, hadn't seen the need to call her any sooner, he added, almost as an afterthought. There'd been some paperwork to sort through first. Family matters. Nothing Angela needed to worry herself with, not right away. There was land, he said, a parcel near a creek outside Marshall, left to her by name in her father's will, some outbuilding on it, an old container structure her father had apparently built himself. Not much market value, the lawyer said. Rural, hard to access, hard to sell. He mentioned, almost in passing, that the family was already handling a few loose ends on the title. Nothing that concerned her, just some paperwork that needed cleaning up before anything could move forward. Angela didn't ask him to repeat it. She didn't need to. She was already doing the math a different way. Miles from Marshall to wherever this creek was, gas left in the tank. Whether Maya's shoes would hold up to walking through brush. "That's fine," she said. "Thank you for calling." It wasn't fine. She knew that the way she'd once known, from 3 rooms away, that a soldier's breathing had changed. But there was no version of this call where saying so would get her anything. She hung up, looked back at Maya, still asleep, one hand fisted in Patch's frayed fur. Angela reached back and pulled the blanket higher over her daughter's shoulder without waking her. The same motion, every cold morning, whether there was a blanket to spare or not. Then she took the scrap of paper where she'd written the address the lawyer had given her, folded it once, then again, and tucked it into her coat pocket. She did not know yet that her father had written her name on a piece of paper like this one. 11 years before any lawyer ever called. The road narrowed after every turn, until it stopped being a road at all. Angela drove through downtown Marshall first, out of habit more than necessity. Main Street still carrying the marks of 2 years back, when the French Broad had climbed higher than anyone alive had ever seen it. A watermark ran along the brick face of the old depot building, faint now, chest high on a grown man. A line nobody had bothered to paint over. Some storefronts had reopened with new drywall that hadn't quite weathered in to match the old. The town had healed. It just hadn't finished healing yet. The way a scar stays a different color than the skin around it for longer than people expect. Maya sat up in the back seat somewhere past the second stoplight, rubbing one eye with the heel of her hand, Patch still tucked under her arm. "Are we there?" "Almost." It wasn't really an answer. Angela didn't have one yet. The GPS gave up 2 turns past the edge of town, the little blue dot on her phone freezing in place on a stretch of gravel that the map didn't seem to believe existed. She kept driving anyway, following the paper address instead, a county route number, then a name, Birch Hollow Road, though there was no sign for it, just a gap in the trees where the gravel bent left and dropped toward the water. That was when she saw it. The house sat 2 stories tall, built from what had clearly once been shipping containers. 3 of them, maybe 4, welded and stacked and cut through with windows that didn't match each other. The whole structure raised on steel legs a good 5 feet above the creek bed below. The paint had gone the color of rust in most places, streaked where rain had run down the seams for years, but the frame stood square. Nothing about it leaned. Nothing about it looked like the kind of place a lawyer would call worthless on the phone. Angela parked at the tree line and sat there a moment with the engine off. The way she used to sit outside a house before a call, letting her eyes do the work before her feet did. A wooden footbridge crossed the creek to the front steps, half its boards silvered and soft-looking with age, one whole section missing its handrail. And at the far end, bolted to the last upright post, a small solar light fixture sat catching the morning sun, its little panel angled just right, like somebody had adjusted it on purpose recently for exactly this kind of weather. It was still on, or ready to be, come dark. Angela had spent enough years reading a room to know what didn't belong in one. A dying light on an abandoned property looked one way. Cracked glass, dead battery, wires hanging loose. This didn't look dying. It looked kept. "Mom, look." Maya had her old phone out. The screen cracked in the corner, snapping pictures of the house through the windshield glass. "It's like a spaceship. Can we go in?" "In a minute." Angela got out first, boots meeting gravel, and stood at her end of the bridge without crossing yet. The creek ran loud underneath, cold sounding even from a few feet up, the kind of sound that made you want to zip your jacket higher. She put one hand on the first post and pushed. The wood gave, just slightly, under her weight. Not rotten through, not yet, but tired. Somewhere underneath the smell of wet lumber and rust, faint but there, something newer cut through, a trace of cedar, maybe, or fresh-cut pine. Not old wood settling, wood that had been worked recently. She didn't say anything to Maya about it. She filed it away instead, the same place she used to file the small things that didn't add up on a patrol. A door left unlatched, a dog that didn't bark, things that meant somebody had been through before you. Her father had been dead 3 months. Nobody paid a light bill, replaced a plank, or trimmed the brush on a piece of land that meant nothing to anyone. Somebody had been here, recently. Angela didn't know who, and the bridge under her boots, creaking softly with each shift of her weight, though, wasn't going to tell her. She looked back once at Maya, still snapping pictures, then down the gravel road toward the way they'd come, toward the last building she remembered passing, a small store with a hand-painted sign, half a mile back. Somebody in a town this size always knew something. The bell over the door gave one short ring, and the woman behind the counter looked up before Angela had a chance to say anything at all. She was maybe 70, small and solid, wearing a cardigan over an apron that said Whitfield's in faded thread. She set down the rag she'd been using to wipe the counter and just looked at Angela for a long moment. Not rude, not startled, just looking, the way you'd study a photograph you hadn't seen in years to make sure you weren't imagining the resemblance. "You've got his eyes," she said finally. "Harold's. Same exact color, same way of not blinking when you're figuring something out." Angela hadn't said her name yet. "I'm Dolores," the woman said, coming around the counter, wiping her hand on her apron before she offered it. "Whitfield. I run this place, such as it is. You'd be Angela." "How did you—" "Small town." Dolores said it simply, like that explained everything, and in a place like Marshall, it mostly did. "Coffee?" Angela hadn't planned on staying, but there was a pot already going behind the counter and something about the smell of it. Strong, a little burnt at the edges, the way gas station coffee always is, pulled her back 37 years without asking permission. She was 12. Her father had made coffee exactly once that she could remember, badly, the grounds still floating on top, and she'd drunk it anyway because he'd made it for her and nobody had ever done that before. "Sit," Dolores said, nodding at a little table by the window. "I've got a minute before the Colby boy comes in for his father's cigarettes." Angela sat. "I brought your daddy coffee every Saturday morning for about 15 years, Dolores said, settling into the chair across from her, cup in both hands. "Walked it out to him myself, rain or shine, because that man would forget to eat if the sky didn't remind him. He wasn't much of a talker. You could sit with Harold Cole a whole hour and come away with maybe 6 words." She smiled, small and private. "But every single Saturday, without fail, he'd ask me the same thing. Did the girl ever write?" Angela's throat did something she didn't have a name for. "I didn't know he asked that," she said. "Well, he did. Every Saturday. Did the girl ever write?" Dolores said it again, slower this time, like she wanted Angela to actually hear it and not just receive it. "I never had a good answer for him. Just told him not yet, maybe next week." He'd nod like that settled something, and then he wouldn't bring it up again till the next Saturday. Outside, a truck rattled past on the gravel, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Angela turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, not drinking it. "There's a man you'll want to meet," Dolores said eventually. "Ray Delgado. Lives up past the ridge, does carpentry work, bridge repair, that sort of thing. He helped your daddy build half of what's out there. Knows that house better than I know this store. And I've been in this store 40 years. Does he know why my father built it the way he did? 2 stories. All that steel? Dolores's mouth tightened, just slightly. The kind of expression a person gets when they're deciding how much of the truth is theirs to give away. I don't speak ill of the dead, she said. Or the living, for that matter. Your daddy remarried when you were, what, 38? Renee's not a wicked woman, whatever you might have heard or might come to hear. Fact is, she kept this county off that land more than once, paid the property taxes herself more than 1 year, when Harold got to where he couldn't keep track of due dates anymore. Nobody in that family ever thanked her for it, far as I know. She paused. But I'll tell you this much. Those last few months, your father worried about something. I didn't say what. I just know worried when I see it. Same as I know coffee's gone cold when I forget to drink it. Angela sat with that a moment, turning it over. It didn't fit neatly anywhere yet. She let it sit. Dolores stood, went back behind the counter, and reached beneath the register into a small tin box. The kind that used to hold hard candy, Angela guessed, from the faded rooster painted on the lid. She came back with something small, pinched between 2 fingers, and set it on the table in front of Angela without ceremony. A key. Small, brass gone dull with age, threaded onto a bit of blue twine that had softened from years of handling. He gave me this to keep, maybe 6 years back. Told me to hold on to it and give it to you if you ever came asking about that land. Dolores didn't sit back down. Didn't tell me what it opens. Wasn't my business to ask. What am I supposed to do with it? You'll know when you need to. Dolores turned back toward the counter, already reaching for her rag again, already moving on to the next small task, the way people do when they've said everything they mean to say. Go on now. Ray's place is up the Ridge Road, blue mailbox, can't miss it. Tell him Dolores sent you. The bell rang once more as Angela stepped back out into the cold. The key sat cold in her palm, smaller than she'd expected, and nothing at all like any lock she remembered seeing in that house. Inside, everything sat exactly where it belonged, like the man who lived there had only just stepped out for firewood. Angela stood in the doorway a long moment before she made herself cross the threshold. The main room ran the length of the first container. Low ceiling, a wood stove in the corner with ash still banked cold inside it. Pots hung on the wall in order of size, smallest to largest, left to right. Boots by the door, 2 pairs, lined up heel to the wall like a man had set them there for mourning and never come back to put them on. A single chair faced the window that looked out over the creek. Nothing about the room felt abandoned. It felt paused. She was still standing there, one hand on the doorframe, when she heard the truck. An old Ford, more primer than paint, came down the gravel and stopped at the far end of the bridge. A man climbed out, mid-50s, weathered the way men get, who work outside for a living, a canvas tool bag slung over one shoulder. He didn't cross right away. He just looked at her across the creek for a second, the way Dolores had looked at her in the store, like he was checking a memory against a face. Saw your headlights coming up the Ridge Road yesterday evening, he said, once he'd crossed. Figured somebody'd finally come. He held out a hand, rough and dry. Ray Delgado. Your father and I did work out here, off and on, going on 6 years. Angela. I know who you are. He said it plain, not unkind. You've got his jaw. Angela let that sit a second. Everybody in this town seemed to be handing her back pieces of her father's face like they were returning something she'd misplaced. He tell you much about me? Not in words. Ray shifted the tool bag on his shoulder, looked past her into the house. Harold wasn't a man who used 10 words when 3 would do, but I helped him reinforce the crawl space under here. Oh, 4 years back now, maybe 5. Man wanted the floor down there load rated for something. Wouldn't say what. I mostly held the light. He nodded toward a narrow door at the back of the main room, one Angela hadn't noticed yet, half hidden behind a coat rack. Basement's down there, half underwater most winters, this close to the creek. But there's one section of subfloor he had me help him weld different from the rest. Never did explain why. I figured it wasn't my business to ask a man about his own house. Angela went first. The stairs were steel, narrow, cold enough through her boot soles that she felt it in her ankles by the 3rd step. The basement opened into a low concrete and steel room, damp along the walls, water stains climbing a foot up from the floor, where spring runoff had clearly come and gone more than once. Ray's flashlight beam swept the room and landed on a section near the back wall, a rectangle of subfloor maybe 4 feet by 3, its welded seams tighter, cleaner, newer looking than the rest of the patchwork floor around it. Angela crouched down and ran 2 fingers along the weld line. She'd spent 2 tours reading things other people walked past without seeing. A wound that didn't match the story a soldier told about how he got it. A fever curve that meant something different than the chart said. This wasn't a trained eye for welding. It didn't need to be. The seam around this section sat even and consistent. The kind of work somebody does slowly, carefully, more than once, checking it against itself. Not the kind of settling a floor does on its own after 20 years near water. This wasn't an accident, she said. Ray crouched next to her, said nothing, just handed her the pry bar from his bag. It took longer than she expected. The bolts had rusted enough to fight her, and twice she had to stop and reset her grip, sweat starting at her collar despite the basement cold. Ray held the light steady and didn't offer to take over. The metal shrieked once, sharp, when the first corner finally gave, and Angela sat back on her heels, breathing harder than the effort alone should have cost her. The 2nd and 3rd corners came easier. When the panel finally lifted free, a smell rose up out of the gap underneath. Damp earth first, then rust, then something else. Faint. That might have been oil or might have been nothing at all. Underneath, set into a shallow concrete recess, sat a small steel box, no bigger than a toolbox, with a keyhole in the lid instead of a latch. Angela's hand went to her coat pocket before she'd fully decided to move it. The key from Dolores's tin slid in clean, no forcing, no hesitation, and turned with a small, definite click that felt louder than it should have in that quiet room. Well, Ray said softly, more to himself than to her. Inside the box, wrapped once in an oilcloth gone stiff with age, sat a leather-bound journal, the cover worn pale at the corners where a hand had held it open again and again. The leather was cool and a little damp against her palms, heavier than a book that size had any right to be. Ray straightened up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and didn't say anything else. He set the pry bar down by the stairs, quiet, deliberate, the way a man moves when he's decided a room isn't his anymore. "I'll be up top," he said. "Give a shout if you need anything." Angela heard his boots on the steel stairs, then the front door easing shut above her, and then nothing but the creek running somewhere beyond the concrete walls and her own breath, slower now than it had been a minute ago. She sat down right there on the damp floor, knees drawn up, and held the journal against her chest for a long moment before she let herself open it. The leather was warm, warmer than a basement that cold should have allowed, like it had been carried, held, read, only the day before by someone else's hands. The first pages didn't say a word about her. They talked about steel. 316 Tobin of Scrapyard. Container 1, Corton steel. Minor surface rust. Structurally sound. Cut for window frame north wall, 34 by 22. Reinforce with 2-in angle iron. The handwriting was small, square. The kind of print a man learns in a trade and never unlearns, page after page of it. Grades of metal, weld temperatures, dates going back further than Angela could count, without doing the math twice. She recognized the year on the third page. 24 years old. The year her mother died. She turned pages slower after that. Somewhere around a dozen entries in, tucked between a note about roofing seams and one about the creek's flood line from an old survey map, a different line appeared, written a little larger, like he'd wanted to make sure it stood out from the rest. The year you turned 26. Still don't know what to say to you on the phone. Said it was raining. It wasn't. Angela sat with that a moment before turning the page. They kept coming after that, spaced out, never dated the way the technical entries were, marked instead by her own life instead of the calendar. The year you enlisted. Told Dolores I was proud and near about choked on the words. The year the boy married you. No name for Daniel, not yet. Just the boy. The way a father might hold a son-in-law at a careful distance until he'd earned something closer. Good hands. Watched him fix the truck without being asked. That told me enough. Her father hadn't called. Hadn't visited. Not more than a handful of times in 20 years. Not since her mother's funeral, where the two of them had stood on opposite sides of a grave and not known how to close the distance. But somewhere out here, alone in a house built from scrap steel, he had been keeping track of her whole life like a man logging weld temperatures. Careful, exact, never once telling her he had known. All those years, he had known exactly where she was. The entries thinned out for a stretch. Just weld logs again, roofing repairs, a note about the bridge boards needing replacing before winter. Until Angela reached a page where the handwriting changed. Not shakier yet, just heavier. Pressed harder into the paper, like the pen had needed more from him to get the words out. Dolores told me about the boy's lungs. Didn't hear it from you, and I understand why. I've had a long time to think about what I couldn't fix in this life. I never could keep a man alive out where the bullets were. And God knows I tried different wars than the one you fought. But the trying's the same. I couldn't save the ones who needed saving. I couldn't even manage that with your mother, near the end. But a man can build something, even if he can't fix what's already broken. I can't save your husband. I couldn't save mine. Myself, I mean. The man I used to be, back before this land taught me different. But I can give you somewhere to put people back together after they've made it home. That's what this house is. Not for me. Never was. Angela read it twice. The first time, the words just sat on the page, flat, like they belonged to someone else's story. The second time, something in her chest gave the way the subfloor panel had given upstairs. Not all at once. Just a slow release of pressure that had been sitting there longer than she'd let herself notice. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just sat very still, the journal balanced on her knees, listening to the creak somewhere on the other side of the concrete wall, and let the sentence finish doing whatever it needed to do to her. The last entry sat by itself on the final written page, and the handwriting there had changed again. Not heavier this time, but looser. The letters drifting slightly off their line, the way a hand does when it's stopped fully trusting itself. The date matched something Angela already knew without wanting to. 3 weeks before he died. Somebody's had me sign something. Can't rightly say what anymore. My eyes aren't doing what they used to, and I didn't read it close as I should have. I don't remember all of what I put my name to. If something's not right when the time comes, you go find Sam Okafor on Bridge Street. Known him since the VFW hall, back when it still had a roof that didn't leak. He's the kind of man who reads a thing twice. I trust him more than I trust my own memory these days, and that's the truth of it. Angela's hand found the edge of the page and held it there, not turning, not letting go. She read the entry again, slower, watching the way the letters wandered a little more with each line, watching a strong man's handwriting come apart in real time across 4 sentences. Only then did her own hand start to shake, matching his, 40 years and 1 basement apart. She closed the journal gently, both palms flat against the cover, and sat with it a long moment in the cold and the dark before she made herself stand up. Upstairs, Ray was exactly where he'd said he'd be, sitting on the porch steps with a thermos, not asking anything, just glancing up when she came through the door with red eyes and a journal held against her ribs like it might try to leave her. She didn't explain. He didn't ask. Angela climbed into her van, drove back down the gravel road until 2 bars finally flickered onto her phone screen near the county route, and pulled over onto the shoulder with the engine still running. Her hands were still not quite steady when she typed the name into the search bar. Sam Okafor, Bridge Street. Ray looked at the number longer than Angela expected him to. She'd found it on the second-to-last page of the journal, back at the house 2 days later, once she'd stopped shaking enough to read the rest of it properly. A single line of digits, no label, no context, tucked below a weld log entry about the porch railing. She'd assumed at first it was another batch code, the kind that ran through half the journal: steel grade, heat number, supplier lot. But the format was wrong. Too many digits grouped the wrong way. Nothing about it matched steel. Ray took the journal from her, turned it toward the window light, and went quiet for a good 10 seconds. "That's a bank routing number," he said finally, followed by an account. "I've seen your daddy write something close to this on a deposit slip before. First Appalachian, the branch on Main." He handed the journal back. "Man went in every month, near as I could tell. Same time, same teller counter if she was working. Never said what for." 2 days after that, Angela stood in the lobby of First Appalachian Bank in downtown Marshall, the counter's old marble-worn pale in a path where 25 years of shoes had crossed it. The teller who came to help her introduced herself as Louise Tron, a small woman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of steady eyes that had clearly spent a career learning what to say and what to hold back. "Harold Cole," Louise said, before Angela had even finished explaining who she was. "I'd know that name walking in blind. Came in the second Friday of every month. Near enough you could set a clock by him. Small deposits. Cash mostly. Never once made a withdrawal, not in all the years I worked his account." "Did he say what it was for?" Louise's mouth did something careful, weighing a line she wasn't supposed to cross. "He'd say the same thing every time. Putting it by for when it's needed. I asked him once, maybe 15 years back, 'When's that going to be?' He just smiled and said I'd know it when I saw it." She paused. "He never did say who'd be the one seeing it." Angela's chest did something small and tight. "I need to know if I can access it," she said. "I'm his daughter. His only child." Louise's expression shifted, sympathetic but immovable, the look of someone bound by rules she'd learned to respect even when they were inconvenient. Somewhere behind her, a coin-counting machine clattered through someone else's change, filling the small silence before she spoke again. "I can't discuss balances, dear. Not without the proper paperwork in front of me. Bank privacy, you understand." Doesn't matter who's asking, family or otherwise. She glanced down at her screen, typed something, and her eyes stayed there a beat longer than the task required. What I can tell you is the account isn't part of any estate that'll go through the courthouse. It's held in a trust. Revocable living trust. His name on it. And you're listed as the person it goes to. Only person. Has been for a good while now. Short words. Simple ones. Her father had built something. Away from the house. Away from the will. Away from anything Renee or Whitney could ever put their hands on. 25 years of Second Fridays. Small deposits. Cash. Never touched. A man standing at this same counter, saying the same 6 words, over and over, until a stranger behind a desk knew them better than his own daughter did. He set it aside, Angela said, mostly to herself. He surely did. Louise's eyes softened, just slightly, past the professional line she'd been holding all conversation. I'll tell you one more thing, and then I really can't say more. Man never once asked me what interest rate he was earning. Didn't care about growing it. Just wanted it there, waiting for when it's needed. She folded her hands on the counter. He said that phrase so many times I used to wonder what he meant by it. Never did tell me when needed was supposed to arrive. Angela thanked her, took the card Louise offered with instructions for what documentation she'd need to bring back. A certified copy of the trust, proof of identity, something called a certification of trust that a lawyer could draw up in an afternoon, and walked back out into the cold with her hands not quite steady. She sat in the van, in the bank parking lot, for a long time, without turning the key. Whatever Renee and Whitney thought they were holding on to, the land, the house, whatever paperwork they'd gotten Harold to sign in those last confused weeks, none of it touched this. This had been built somewhere else entirely, brick by brick, deposit by deposit, for 25 years, in a place none of them had ever thought to look. It should have felt like relief. Mostly, it felt like standing at the edge of something too large to see the far side of yet. She pulled out her phone, found the number she'd saved 2 days earlier, and called Sam Okafor for the first time. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. A short, businesslike greeting. A man's voice. Hurried. Mr. Okafor, my name is Angela Cole, she said, keeping her voice level, the way she'd once kept it level giving a report she didn't want to give. My father was Harold Cole. He left your name for me, in case something wasn't right. I think something isn't right. She left her number and hung up. Then she sat there with both hands on the wheel, engine off, watching her breath fog faintly against the cold glass, and did not drive away. Her phone buzzed in her lap before she'd found the will to move. Not Sam Okafor's number. A number she didn't recognize. The caller ID reading 3 words that meant nothing to her yet, and everything to her family. Asheville Ridge Holdings. Angela let it ring twice before she answered. Ms. Cole, Whitney Doyle. The voice on the other end was smooth, businesslike, pleasant in a way that had clearly been practiced until it stopped sounding practiced. I hope this isn't a bad time. I'm an attorney, and I also happen to be Renee's daughter, your father's wife. I wanted to reach out personally rather than let this drag through more formal channels. Okay. I understand there's been some confusion about the property out on Birch Hollow. I want to be upfront with you. There's a title issue out there, a recording error, essentially, on the deed. It happens more than people realize with older family land, and it can take months, sometimes longer, to clear through the county before anyone can do anything with the property at all. A pause, brief, professional. My family would like to resolve it quickly, for everyone's sake. We're prepared to offer $15,000 as a goodwill payment. if you'll sign a release, essentially agreeing not to pursue any claim against the current recorded owner while the title issue works itself out. $15,000. Angela did the math without meaning to, the way she always did now, automatically, the way another person might blink. 15,000 paid off more than a fifth of what she owed the hospital. It covered 4 months of an apartment with real walls and a real door that locked. It bought Maya a school year where nobody had to notice her shoes. If the land's worthless, Angela said, why $15,000 to make me stop asking about it? The pause on the other end ran half a second too long. My family would just like to put this behind us, Whitney said. It's been a difficult few months, for my mother especially. Somewhere behind Whitney's voice, muffled but not muffled enough, another voice cut in, low and clipped. Don't let this drag out, Whit. Whitney didn't acknowledge it. Angela heard her exhale once, before her voice came back, level again, professional again. I know this is a lot to take in over the phone, Whitney said. Take a day or two, think it over. I'll follow up. I'm not signing anything today, Angela said. I need to think. Of course. Whitney's tone didn't shift, not outwardly, but something in the pace of it changed, like a woman recalculating a plan she'd expected to close faster. I'll call you Thursday. The line went dead before Angela had decided whether to say goodbye. She sat in the driver's seat a long moment, phone still in her hand, engine off. The cold starting to work its way back into the van now that the heater had had time to lose its argument with the afternoon. $15,000. A recording error on the deed. The kind of phrase a person used when they wanted a problem to sound smaller than it was. Angela had heard men explain away worse things in exactly that tone. Calm, technical, designed to make the listener feel like objecting would be unreasonable. She didn't feel unreasonable. She felt like someone standing at the edge of a decision that wasn't really a decision, not with $200 in her account, and a hospital bill that added interest every month whether she looked at it or not. Maya was in the back seat when Angela turned around, cross-legged, patch in her lap, watching her mother's face with the particular attention kids develop when they've learned that adult phone calls sometimes decide things. Are we going to have a real house, Mom? Angela didn't answer right away. She reached back instead, pulled Maya over the console into the front seat despite the awkward angle of it, and held her daughter against her chest for a moment, chin resting on the crown of her head, saying nothing because there wasn't yet anything true and good enough to say. Through the windshield, past the tree line, she could just make out the shape of the bridge from here, a mile off, more imagined than seen. The little solar light at the end of it would be on again soon, once the sun dropped low enough. It always was. Angela didn't know yet whether $15,000 was supposed to buy her out of a promise her father had spent 40 years building, or whether somebody on the other end of that call already knew exactly what that promise was worth and was hoping she wouldn't find out before Thursday. The office didn't try to impress anyone, and that was probably what made Angela trust it. 2 rooms above a hardware store on Bridge Street, a window unit rattling in the corner, even though it wasn't running, filing cabinets that didn't match each other stacked along one wall, a single photograph hung behind the desk, faded, a dozen young men in desert fatigues squinting into the sun, arms slung over each other's shoulders, the way soldiers do when the photographer says closer and nobody argues. Sam Okafor sat beneath it, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, a legal pad already open in front of him. Sit, he said, not unkindly. Tell me from the start. Angela did. The journal first, laid flat on his desk, then the whole of it. The key from Dolores, the crawl space, the trust at First Appalachian, And finally, the last entry, the one with the handwriting that wandered. She read it aloud rather than hand him the book, because some part of her needed to hear her father's words out loud one more time before they became evidence instead of a letter. Somebody's had me sign something. Can't rightly say what anymore. Sam's pen, which had been moving steadily the whole time, stopped. He sat with it a long moment, long enough that Angela noticed the silence, before he set the pen down carefully, like it might make noise if he dropped it wrong. "Your father wasn't a man who forgot things easy," he said. "I knew him some. VFW Hall, back when I still had hair worth combing. He didn't talk much, but the little he said, he meant." He picked the pen back up. "Let's find out what he signed." It took him 3 phone calls and 1 drive to the county building to have what he needed. He laid it out for Angela the following week. Papers spread across the desk, in an order only he seemed to fully understand. "Your father's will is 15 years old, and nobody's contesting it. It leaves you the land, plain language, no ambiguity. And the trust at the bank, that's yours too, always was. Sits outside anything the courthouse touches at all. Nobody in that family has a legal foothold on either one. Never did." Then what happened? 3 weeks before he passed, your father signed a durable power of attorney, naming Renee as his agent. That's not unusual on its own. Plenty of families do that when somebody's failing. But a power of attorney dies the moment the person granting it does. The law's clear on that. Always has been. Sam tapped a page. "Problem is, right after your father passed, before the will was even filed, Whitney recorded a deed transferring the land into an LLC, Asheville Ridge Holdings, using that same power of attorney as her authority to sign on his behalf. But he was already gone." "He was already gone," Sam agreed, "which means that deed was never valid to begin with. It's sitting on the county record right now like a stain nobody's wiped off yet. What the law calls a cloud on title. Doesn't change who owns that land. You do. Always have. But it means you can't sell it. Can't borrow against it. Can't prove clean ownership to anybody until a judge orders that deed struck from the record." He slid a second document across the desk. "This is the one that matters most, though. Public filing. North Carolina Secretary of State. Asheville Ridge Holdings was registered 5 days before your father ever signed that power of attorney." He let that sit a moment. Somebody had already built the box before they asked him to climb into it. Angela stared at the date, then at the date beside it, doing the arithmetic twice to make sure her eyes weren't rearranging it into something easier to bear. "There's more," Sam said. "Your father's doctor increased his memory medication 2 weeks before the signing. That's in the medical file, and as next of kin, you've got a right to request it. And there wasn't a single witness in that room who wasn't already Renee's family. A notary's only job is confirming who's signing, nothing more. No rule broken there. But a court doesn't need broken rules to see undue influence. It just needs a pattern." Sam capped his pen and set it down across the legal pad, giving her a second before he went on. "So what happens now? I file a petition with the Clerk of Superior Court, Estates Division, right here in Madison County. We're not contesting the will. Nothing wrong with the will. We're asking the court to void that deed. Quiet title action, it's called. Puts your ownership back on clean paper, the way it should have stayed all along." He paused. "Could end up in front of the district attorney, too, given the financial exploitation statute this state's got on the books for vulnerable adults. That part, I don't control. DA decides that on their own. And the $15,000? Don't say no yet. Don't say yes either." Sam's voice didn't change, but something in his hands did. A small tightening around the pen, there and gone. "Let them wonder. Every day you don't answer is a day they have to keep guessing what you know. He was quiet a moment, then added, almost as an aside, the way a man mentions something he doesn't want to make a bigger deal of than it is. For what it's worth, and this doesn't change anything I just told you, your stepmother did carry those property taxes more than 1 year, back when your father's memory started slipping on due dates. County record shows that plain as day, too, doesn't excuse what came after. Just means the whole picture's got more than one color in it. Angela nodded slowly. She hadn't expected him to say something kind about Renee, and somehow that made her trust him more, not less. At the door, coat half on, she turned back. You knew my father? Really knew him? Knew him enough. Sam almost smiled. He mentioned you exactly twice in all the years I sat near him at that hall. Both times, he said the same 4 words. My daughter, the medic. Didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. Way his chest came up when he said it. Angela's eyes stung, and she let them, right there in the doorway. I don't promise fast, Sam said, walking her out. I promise right. She stepped out onto Bridge Street, the cold catching her face the way it always did this time of year. And for the first time in longer than she could easily count, she didn't feel like she was carrying all of it alone. That didn't make it light. It just made it possible to keep walking. Whitney had signed off on hundreds of filings like this one. She had never once stopped on a signature before. The notice came by certified mail on a Tuesday. A petition filed with the Clerk of Superior Court, Estates Division, Madison County, captioned, "In re the estate of Harold Cole," seeking to void a deed recorded 3 months prior on grounds that the power of attorney underlying it had expired before the transfer was ever signed. Whitney read it twice standing at her own mailbox, cold air biting at her wrists, before she carried it inside and spread every document from the file across her kitchen table. She'd handled the recording herself. She remembered the day, remembered thinking it strange how fast her mother had wanted it done, remembered Renee saying, more than once, he signed it while he was still with us. Whit, that's what matters. Get it filed. Whitney hadn't questioned the timeline then. She'd had no reason to. She had a reason now. She laid the power of attorney next to 3 older documents pulled from Harold's file: a homeowner's insurance renewal from 2 years back, a vehicle title transfer from 4, a hospital consent form from 18 months ago. Harold's signature on each of those ran steady, looping, confident, a hand that had signed its own name 10,000 times and never had to think about it. The signature on the power of attorney didn't match. It wasn't just smaller. The letters wandered off their baseline halfway through his last name, the way handwriting does when the hand holding the pen isn't entirely sure where the paper is anymore. Whitney sat back in her chair. She pulled up the LLC formation records next, her own filing, done through her own firm's account, with the Secretary of State, a task so routine she'd barely remembered doing it. She'd assumed, without ever checking, that she'd registered Asheville Ridge Holdings sometime after the power of attorney was signed. Once there was actually something for the entity to hold. That was the order things were supposed to happen in. The filing date sat 5 days earlier. She checked it twice, then a third time, in case her eyes were doing what her stomach already suspected. Whitney found her mother in the kitchen that evening, mid-conversation about nothing, and asked, as casually as she could manage, who the mobile notary had been that day. The one who'd come to the house to witness Harold's signature. I don't remember, honestly. Renee didn't look up from the pan she was stirring. Why does it matter? The paperwork's filed. It's done. It matters because his signature doesn't look right, Mom. People's hands shake when they're sick, Whitney. a little sharper now, a little faster. "You're a lawyer, you know that." Whitney let it go. But she noticed, the way you notice a door that used to swing quiet now catching on its hinge, that her mother hadn't answered the actual question. She found the notary's business card eventually, tucked in the back of an old folder. A man named Dale Pruitt, no fixed office, the kind who worked out of his truck, and a laminated stamp. The number on the card rang twice and disconnected. A second search turned up nothing current at all, like the man had folded up his business the same month the deed was filed and walked away from it clean. In the same folder, tucked behind the notary's card, Whitney found 4 tax receipts from the county, one for each of the last 4 years, her mother's signature on every one. Small proof of something her mother had done quietly and right, long before she'd done something quietly and wrong. Whitney sat with both truths in her lap and didn't know yet how to hold them at the same time. She didn't sleep much that night. She lay there running the dates in order, over and over, the way you check a math problem you already know is wrong, but keep hoping will come out different the 4th time. The LLC came first, then the signature that didn't match her father's hand, then the deed, filed fast, filed before. The will had even cleared probate intake, filed by her own hand at her own desk, because her mother had asked her to, and she had never once, not for a second, thought to ask why the rush. She thought about Harold. Not her father, never her father, not really, not by blood, but a man who'd shown her more patience than the situation required, who'd taught her to change a tire in the church parking lot the summer she turned 16 because her own father hadn't bothered to, who'd never once made her feel like an inconvenience attached to her mother's second marriage. He hadn't owed her any of that kindness. He'd given it anyway. She drove home a little after 10, pulled into her own driveway, and cut the engine. She didn't get out. Through the windshield, past her own dark yard. The porch light glowed at her mother's house 2 streets over. She could just make it out from here, a small, steady gold against the dark. Whitney sat with her hands still on the wheel, engine ticking as it cooled, and did not know yet whether she was more afraid of what she'd found or of what it would cost her to say it out loud. Whitney didn't call ahead. She just sent one line. "Meet me at Dolores's store, 10 minutes. Angela almost didn't go. She sat with her phone in her hand for a full minute, turning the message over, trying to decide whether this was a trap dressed up as an apology or something else entirely. In the end, it was Maya, glancing over from the back seat, that decided it. "Who was that, Mom?" Angela didn't answer. She just started the van. Dolores's store was empty when Angela arrived, the closed sign already hanging crooked in the window even though it wasn't closing time. Whitney was standing near the coffee pot, coat still on, a manila folder pressed against her side like she wasn't sure yet whether she meant to hand it over or keep walking. "I found the notary's old contact information," Whitney said, no greeting first, "and a copy of the original filing paperwork, before it went to the county. My copy, not the one that got recorded." She set the folder on the counter between them. "You'll want to give this to your attorney." Angela didn't reach for it right away. "Why are you doing this?" Whitney's jaw tightened, just slightly, the way a person's does when they're holding something back that costs them to hold. "I'm not doing this for you," she said. "I'm doing it because he deserved better than what happened in that room." She pushed the folder another inch across the counter. "That's all I've got to say about it." She was gone before Angela had found the words to thank her. The bell over the door ringing once behind her, same as it had for Angela 3 weeks earlier. Sam had what he needed within the hour. Before he ever picked up the phone to call the notary, a man named Dale Pruitt, according to the folder, license number still active, according to the state database, Sam filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina Secretary of State's Notary Public Section, laying out plainly that Pruitt had witnessed a signature with no independent party present, under circumstances that raised real questions about the signer's capacity, a commission that could be suspended, a livelihood gone if the board found what Sam suspected they'd find. Pruitt called back 2 days later, not the other way around. Sam let it go through to voicemail once, on purpose, then picked up the second call. North Carolina only required one party's consent to record a phone call, and Sam had told Angela that fact plainly before he ever dialed anyone. He wasn't hiding anything from her, and he wasn't about to start hiding something from the file either. Pruitt's voice came through unsteady, a man trying to explain his way out of something before anyone had even accused him of it. He said he'd gone out to the house that day because Renee had called him personally, said her husband was tired, said they just needed it done quick and proper, no fuss, no strangers standing around, making a sick man self-conscious. He said he hadn't thought twice about it at the time. Man's own wife was right there. Seemed reasonable enough. "Did anyone else witness the signing?" Sam asked. "No, sir. Just her." "Did you have any concern about his ability to understand what he was signing?" A pause, longer than the first one. "I do notary work, not doctoring. Wasn't my place to say." It was enough. Sam thanked him, hung up, and sat with the recording a moment before he made the second call. He reached Renee that evening, told her plainly that a petition had been filed with the clerk of Superior Court to void the deed, laid out the timeline in careful, unhurried language, the same way he'd have explained it to anyone. Renee's voice rose before he'd finished the second sentence. "That land was never worth anything until she decided it was," Renee said. "I kept the taxes paid on it 4 years running while Harold couldn't remember his own due dates, and nobody so much as thanked me for it. I'm not signing anything, and neither is Whitney. And you can tell that girl the trust account won't do her any good either, not once we—" She stopped herself half a sentence too late. Sam didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mrs. Doyle, I never mentioned the trust account," he said, evenly. "How did you know there was one?" The silence on the other end lasted a long time. "I have to go," Renee said, and the line went dead. Sam noted the call time in his file, closed his laptop, and looked out his office window at Bridge Street for a while before he picked up his phone again. "We have enough now," he told Angela, once she answered. His voice didn't sound like victory. It sounded like a man setting down something heavy he'd been carrying carefully for weeks, finally allowed to let go of it. The conference room didn't have a jury box, didn't have cameras, didn't have anything that looked like the courtrooms Angela had seen on television growing up. Just a rectangular table, 4 chairs on one side, 3 on the other, and a stack of paperwork thick enough that somebody had needed 2 hands to carry it in. Renee's attorney had reached out 2 days after Sam's call to her. Not Whitney, who had formally withdrawn as counsel of record the same week, citing conflict of interest in a filing so brief it barely qualified as an explanation. A hearing had been scheduled with the clerk of Superior Court, Estates Division, but it never happened. Most cases like this didn't make it that far, Sam told Angela beforehand, sitting across his desk with the settlement draft between them. Once the paper trail was laid out plain enough, most families found a way to close the door quietly rather than have a judge open it in public. The terms took less time to agree on than Angela expected. Asheville Ridge Holdings would be voluntarily dissolved. The deed recorded against the land and would be canceled by consent. Title reverting clean to Angela, as it always should have been. The North Carolina State Board investigating Dale Pruitt's notary commission was a separate matter, moving on its own timeline, outside anyone's control at this table. And the district attorney's office, After reviewing the file Sam had submitted under the state's financial exploitation statute, had declined to pursue criminal charges against Renee. Insufficient evidence of intent beyond what the civil record could show, the letter said, in the flat language such letters always used. It wasn't the ending where everyone paid for everything. Angela had stopped expecting that ending somewhere around the fourth segment of her father's journal. One more line sat near the bottom of the agreement, one Angela herself had asked Sam to add: a reimbursement, $6,240. The exact sum Madison County records showed Renee had paid in back property taxes across 4 years, back when Harold's memory had started losing its grip on due dates and deadlines. Not required, not owed, not legally. Angela had thought about it a long time before deciding, and in the end, it hadn't felt like generosity so much as arithmetic, a debt that existed whether or not a court would ever recognize it. Renee signed last, pen moving slower than anyone else's had. When it was done, she looked up at Angela across the table, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. The lawyers had already started gathering papers, the small shuffling sounds of a room getting ready to empty out. "I don't expect you to understand this," Renee said finally, quiet enough that it wasn't really meant for anyone but Angela. "But I stood exactly where you're standing once. Nothing in my hands. Nobody who'd built anything for me to find later. I raised 2 kids alone and nearly lost a house to a lawyer who knew more than I did. I told myself I'd never be in that position again. That doesn't make it right, what I did." Her hands pressed flat against the table, like she needed something solid under them. "I just needed you to know it wasn't nothing to me either." Angela didn't answer with forgiveness. She didn't have it in her yet, and she'd stopped pretending otherwise weeks ago. She didn't answer with anger either. She just nodded, once, a small motion that acknowledged the sentence without agreeing to carry it any further than that. And then she stood, gathered her copy of the settlement, and walked out into the parking lot without looking back to see whether Renee watched her go. That evening, the house on Birch Hollow Road ran on lamplight instead of the grid. The electrician wasn't scheduled to finish the rewiring until the following week. But the oil lamp on the kitchen table threw enough gold across the room that nobody seemed to mind. Ray sat at one end with a mug of coffee gone cold in his hand. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor near her mother's knee, Patch in her lap, listening the way kids listen when they've figured out something important is happening, even if the words are still a little over their heads. Angela had the journal open to the last written page. She read it once through, slow, the way she'd read it alone in the basement weeks before. And this time her voice didn't shake on the hard parts. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Just the low hiss of the lamp and faint through the gap under the front door, the sound of the creek running steady beneath the bridge. Maya looked up at her mother. "Did Grandpa know me?" she asked. "Like, really know me?" Angela thought about the journal entries marking her own life instead of the calendar. The year you enlisted. The year the boy married you. A man who had never once picked up a phone to call and had somehow known everything that mattered anyway. "He knew," Angela said. "He'd been waiting for you." Nobody said anything else for a while after that. Ray looked down into his cold coffee. Maya leaned her head against her mother's arm, Patch tucked between them, and outside the window, past the dark yard, the little solar light on the bridge held steady against the night, the same as it had for 3 months before anyone came looking, the same as it probably had for years before that, waiting, patient, for whoever finally needed it enough to cross. The bridge sounded different now. New boards not yet worn into the give of old footsteps. Ray and 3 other veterans from the county had spent a weekend in late February tearing out what was left of the rotted planks, replacing them board for board, in the same pattern Harold had originally laid, the same width, the same spacing between the uprights. Ray had insisted on that. Said a man ought to be able to recognize his own bridge, even from the other side of something as big as dying. Dolores had let it slip once, months back, that Ray came home from his own war to a house nobody had kept up for him, and Harold was the one who showed up unannounced with a truck full of lumber before Ray ever thought to ask anybody for help. Ray never brought it up himself. He didn't have to. The house itself had changed more. 3 families lived there now, in rotation, veterans waiting on VA claims that moved slower than anyone's patience should have to stretch. A young couple with a baby in the East container. An older man named Curtis, who'd served 2 tours and talked about neither of them. A woman about Angela's age who'd shown up in October with a duffel bag and nothing else and hadn't said much since, though she'd started smiling by December. Nobody paid rent. Nobody was asked to explain how long they'd stay. The rule, such as it was, had come straight out of the journal. The one line Angela had painted by hand above the front door the week the electrician finally finished. Not for me. Never was. Maya, 12 now, spent most Saturday afternoons in the little workshop Ray had built off the side of the house, learning to run a bead of weld under the patient eye of a volunteer named Frank, another veteran. Hands like leather from 40 years of exactly this work. She wasn't good at it yet. Her lines wandered, crossed themselves, came out lumpy in places a trained eye would wince at. She didn't quit anyway. She'd come inside some evenings with a burn mark on her forearm she wore like a badge and describe, in more technical detail than an 11-year-old had any business knowing, exactly what she'd done wrong and what she meant to fix next time. Angela had framed the journal's last written page and hung it in a small glass case just inside the front door. Not to be admired, not really. Just so that anyone who walked through, coming or going, tired or scared or unsure whether they belonged somewhere, could stop and read 4 sentences from a man who'd spent 40 years answering a question nobody had thought to ask him out loud. She still hadn't spoken to Renee. Not since the day the papers were signed. Not a call. Not a card. Nothing. It wasn't hatred, not anymore. She'd let go of that somewhere in the months of paperwork and quiet dinners and Maya's welding lessons. It was just that some doors didn't reopen simply because enough time had passed. Angela didn't know if she'd ever walk through that one again. She'd stopped expecting herself to. That evening, the sky went the color it always did this time of year in early March, gray sliding into something almost purple, the temperature dropping fast enough to feel in her knuckles. Angela stood at her end of the bridge, hands in her coat pockets, watching the little solar light flicker on as the dark came down, same as it had 3 months before she ever knew to look for it, same as it probably had for years before that. She understood something now that she hadn't understood, standing in this exact spot a year earlier. Her father had never really left this place. He'd just been waiting a long time, patient as steel left out in weather, for her to be ready to cross. Have you ever opened a drawer, a box, or an old letter and realized someone had been quietly taking care of you long before you knew you needed it? Tell me about it below. I read every one of them. If Angela's story stayed with you tonight, a like helps it find the people who need it. And subscribing means you'll be here for the next one.